Mully Haugh, Chicago Sports Radio 6-7 The Score. It's always a delight to have Coach Wannstedt with us, and he has a special guest joining us now on the Score Hotline, brought to you by Circa Resort and Casino in Las Vegas.
Hey, Jimmy.
Well, hey, how's everybody doing this morning?
Well, when these guys asked if there'd be any chance you could jump on, I says, well, let me check the weather in Miami.
Well, Dave, in all honesty, the boat is loaded. I've got the ice and the cold ones on it right now, and as soon as I get off this phone, I'm starting the engines and I'm going offshore.
Oh, that's fantastic. Well, everybody here in Chicago appreciate you jumping on, taking a few minutes, maybe start this thing off. You know, obviously the buzz around the country and Chicago is the big trade with the Bears. What's your initial thought there, Jimmy?
Well, I think, really it can be beneficial for both Carolina and Chicago. And as I've said for years, really, getting a bunch of picks, it's great. But, a lot of teams have gotten picks over the years. Back when Eric Dickerson was traded from the Rams, they got a ton of picks. RG3, as far as Washington, when they traded for him, teams have gotten picks over the year. Cleveland Browns, they've had number one picks forever. And so it's not the picks, it's what you do with the picks. And as long as Chicago is able to use those picks and pick the right players, it is a great trade for Chicago. Now, by the same token, you look at Carolina, if they don't pick the right quarterback, it's a bad trade for them. They've got to pick the right quarterback. So, I think it can be beneficial for both teams. It just depends on how they use those picks.
Well, I got to tell you, Jimmy, when I see the Bears trade the number one overall pick, I immediately go to the value chart that you created those many years ago. And did they do okay? Did they do okay? How much did DJ Moore count for? How do I deal with him on the value chart? Tell us a little bit about the way you invented that, the need for it, and are you even amazed? It's been tweaked a little, but it's still used. It's still a very essential part.
It's amazing. I have general managers call me all the time about, hey, I used your chart. Brett Veach of Kansas City called, Ozzie Newsome called, hey, I used your chart. I used your chart. I said, please, I did that chart 30 years ago. But every team has a chart, and the basis is still the one that I designed 30 years ago. Now, a few of them have adjusted for the salary cap, et cetera, but the hard line chart, it's really got to be pick for pick. And in that same year, if you have a future pick, I usually knocked it down about a round, depending on how high it was. If it was a first round, then you got to adjust to where they were going to be in the first round. As far as DJ Moore, you've got to look and see what is his value. And really the only team that knows that is Carolina, because I'm sure teams were calling Carolina, hey, we'll give you this for DJ Moore. Hey, we'll give you a 2. We'll give you a 3 going to a 2, et cetera. So they know the value of him. And so, Chicago's got to say, hey, what's he worth to us? What is he worth to our football team? And that's the value you will put on that particular pick. But,
Jimmy,
how we came up with this chart, my first year in Dallas with Dave, we thought we did pretty good. We took 4 Pro Bowlers with the first 4 picks. Troy Aikman, Harold Johnston, Mark Stepnoski, and Tony Tolbert. 1, 2, 3, 4 in the 4 rounds. But I went to Jerry. I said, Jerry, really, I think we did pretty good, but I'm just shooting from the hip. I was picking players that we knew about when we were in college, and I said, there's a better way to do it. I said, if you'll go with the 10 years before now, for the last 10 years, take every single trade that was made in the NFL, pick for pick, and we can design a bar graph there, or a line graph, and we can put in arbitrarily numbers all the way from the first pick to the last pick. And that way we'll see if we are getting good value or if it's a bad trade. And so I designed the chart, and that chart worked great. for a while, and then Dave goes to Chicago and Norv goes to Washington, and they take my chart with them. So everybody got the chart.
So Jimmy, when you're looking at what the Bears gave up in the trade, and how would you evaluate and weigh DJ Moore and a future 2025 second-round pick versus having that be a first-round pick? Did the Bears benefit by getting the player involved, or is that difficult to measure because you're talking about the difference in a future 2025 first and second-round pick?
Well, I think they got value with Moore. I think he's really an excellent player, and so I think they got good value there. I don't know if you want to put a second-round pick on him or what, but he's a very good player. Now, the other thing you've got to take into account is his contract. How is that going to affect Chicago? How is that affecting Carolina? Did they think they were going to be able to re-sign him, et cetera? And so, but I thought, I think he's a very good player. And so for him to be in the mix on the trade, I think was beneficial for Chicago, all the way. And let's be honest about it. With Chicago, we think Justin Fields is going to be the guy. And if you design the right kind of offense around Justin Fields, then, it's going to be like Jalen Hurts. He's going to be productive.
Hey, Jimmy.
By the same token, they've got a cushion now, in case it doesn't work.
Jimmy, they're sitting there at 9 now, and the big need for the Bears is linemen. Offense and defensive linemen primarily. They were all excited. The word here was Jalen Carter, the big kid at Georgia. He was going to be their guy if they had to sit at 1, and then obviously the some of the legal stuff. Hopefully he's beyond that. Sitting at 9, talk if you could. How aggressive would you be with that 9th pick? And I sat there with you. I mean, I know how aggressive you like to be with your picks in trades. Would you still be aggressive in moving up, moving down to get the guy you want? What's your thoughts there?
Well, yeah, teams have come down here over the years, and they asked me about drafting, and a half a dozen of them said the best thing I ever told them was I would take 3 players in every round that I really wanted them. They were my kind of guys. They were players that are going to help our football team. Forget about this best player available bull crap. You'll get players that are going to help your team. And so I would have 3 players in every round, and you can figure out who's going to take you. Talk to the beat writers from other teams. You can get the scuttlebutt of who teams are looking for. And when it came close to our pick, if two or one of those players is available, I would take them. If they weren't, I would move out of the pick. I didn't ever take the philosophy to take the best player available. Because I wanted to take the best player available that I wanted.
You talk about moving out of the picks. I got stories. I mean, obviously we had them in the book. I mean, what was a good one when you're on the clock story? What comes to mind that I've got a couple, but what one jumps out at you that I don't think people realize the pressure for you to make a decision, when you're on the clock. Let's talk about that.
Well, of course, I had direct dialed every team on every trader, when we were going through the draft, which every team does now. But back then they didn't. I didn't have to dial it.
Right.
And so anyway, we got to moving, and we had a first round pick, and I don't like to take offensive linemen or wide receivers. With the first pick. Now, with the passing game, how it's been elevated, the receivers have moved up in their value. But we were looking, and I wanted to trade out of the pick. And so I got Joe Gibbs on the line with Washington. I said, Joe, I'm going to trade out. Let's swap number ones, and you can give me back this and everything else. And we talked back and forth. He said, okay, got a deal. So it's getting close to that pick. And I called Robert Blackwell, who was our guy in New York at the draft. I said, is Washington, taking their ticket up to the desk? He said, no, there's no movement. I said, geez, we're running out of time. I said, I got to get out of this pick. I don't want to take, the best player available. I want to move down. And, the clock is ticking. I called Robert, what? Go talk to him. Whatever. They said, hey, they hadn't got a call from Joe, da-da-da-da. So I called Joe. I said, "What the hell's going on? Get the ticket in. I would just make the trade." He said, "Jimmy, I'm sorry." He said, "I have to get back with you later. The old man won't let me do it." and so we ended up taking Alvin Harper, who ended up being a good player for us. But I could have got Alvin a little bit later in the draft.
Jimmy, I think when we look at this particular trade that the Bears made, we're wondering, man, that's awful early, right? It's 7 weeks before you have to make that deal, and they make it. It's obvious that DJ Moore was the big part of it because they needed help for Fields. There was nobody in free agency. And you mentioned the salary. He will average $17.4 million over the next 3 years. He makes $20 million this year and then 16 the next 2. We'll find out if that deal holds up or if he wants more money, if he does well. Who knows? But the fact is, there is certainty with him in cost, which is relatively inexpensive compared to how crazy that market's gotten. And he'll have 34 games played by the time you get to that first-round pick that ends up being a second in 2025. So you have to kind of balance that, I would imagine.
Yeah, you're going to get use of the player, and not only use of the player. It's not going to be a rookie that you're going to have to teach a lot. That's why I say the DJ Moore thing is a big part of that trade. And he's, who knows? People would have given him one maybe at one time, for him. So especially with a good contract. So, that's a big part of the trade, getting to use the player, rather than having a pick that may or may not hit. And the other thing is, it's going to take them a while to develop. So, that's a big part of the trade without question.
So, Jimmy, they're in a position to make that deal only because they believe in Justin Fields. They don't move out of the number 1 overall selection spot unless you believe in the quarterback you have. Is that a wise decision in your mind? What do you think of Justin Fields?
Well, I like Justin Fields. There are two things here, though. I don't think there's a slam dunk in the quarterback crop this year. Now, I think there's about 4 of them that are very intriguing, and they got possibilities, and they may end up being great Hall of Famers. Who knows? But are you happy with the size of Bryce Young? Are you happy with the inconsistency and the inaccuracies of Richardson? You got, so you really don't know about some of these quarterbacks. And I think that's the same thing with Carolina. There's not a slam dunk number 1. You got to pick the right guy. But I think with Chicago, when you talk about their situation, they've got to find out if Justin Fields is the guy. And so they've got a cushion there. They've got some picks. Now they can move around. They're going to get some calls for next year's number 1 for a pick. And so they're going to be able to bank some of these picks and maybe not even use picks this year, but have them for next year. And who knows? A year from now, they might be looking at a quarterback. And again, that's, who knows about Justin Fields? I think most everybody feels like he's a franchise guy and to make him a franchise guy, but they do have a little bit of a cushion there next year and thereafter as far as picking a quarterback.
Hey Jimmy, we'll kind of wrap this up here. You mentioned picking offensive linemen. Well, every time Tony comes up here to visit me, Tony comes in here and he gets on the show with Mully Haugh. Now, all he wants to talk about here is hockey. Chicago big hockey.
Oh yeah, right.
So, and we laugh about the story. When Jimmy, we're sitting in the draft room and we're down there late in the rounds, and Jimmy says, "Boy, we need to take an offensive lineman," and it was just at the time when they brought lunch out. So Jimmy says, "Hey, grab Tony, let's get a lineman." So we hey Tony, and he comes around the corner and he's got mayonnaise on his chin, and Jimmy says, "Oh hell, forget about it." And I think that's when you took. I think that maybe when you took Leon Letnick or something like that.
I don't want to take up all your time, but I got to tell a Tony story. First of all, Tony coached what a lot of people graded as maybe one of the best offensive lines in history, and you look at it, we had a 3rd round pick from Central Ohio at right tackle. We had a 7th round pick, Gogan at right guard. We had a third-round pick, Sepnoski at center. We had a undrafted free agent at left guard, Nate Newton, and we had an undrafted defensive player from Hawaii, free agent at left tackle, 2-8. So you look at it. You had a couple of third-round picks. You had a seventh-round pick. You had a couple of undrafted free agents, and they were one of the greatest offensive lines in NFL history. And Howie Long and Michael Strahan get mad at me when I say this. Offensive line, that's the one position that the coach is more valuable than the players. And because if you've got a great offensive line coach, which Tony Wise was, he can develop some of those players. Just like taking Sepnoski. Sepnoski was a 245-pound guard. I said, Tony, can you make him into a center? He said, Coach, I can make him into a center. He had never played center before in his life. We moved him to center. He ended up being a Pro Bowler for us. And so the offensive line coach is a heck of a lot more important than taking an offensive lineman with the 9th pick.
Jimmy, that is fantastic information. We really appreciate you jumping on. I know you got a book out, Swagger, Super Bowls, Brass Balls, and Footballs. It's a memoir and a classic one. How are the sales going?
Yeah, the book has been great. I figured if you're in the College Football Hall of Fame, the Pro Football Hall of Fame, and the Broadcasting Hall of Fame, you ought to write a book called Swagger.
That's great.
Great title.
I got a copy of it, Jimmy. I'm going to give it to Dave and have you on. How's that?
Oh, there you go. We'll get it signed.
Yeah.
Jimmy will take care of it.
Jimmy, you're the best.
Thanks, Jimmy.
Thank you a ton.
All right, Jimmy.
Enjoy talking with you guys. I'm going to go catch me a fish.
Good
luck. Great stuff.
How about that? That's Jimmy Johnson, Dave. That is the life. That's fantastic.